All right. So did everybody get a cup of coffee? For those of you who weren't, is it sweet tea or unsweet tea out there? Unsweet tea. Unsweet tea in Arkansas? Is Arkansas? Okay, I don't know. Okay, whatever. Probably better for you. So we're now going to go into the panel part of this afternoon's work. We're going to talk to the panelists about first what they heard, and then I'm going to follow up with some questions for them. We're going to take a little while to do that. I know that y'all don't have an agenda because FedEx, anybody work for FedEx? Because FedEx had a schism with a few boxes, and we're working on that. So just so you know, if you don't know, that some people have said, oh, you're going to finish at 5:30. I'm going to finish at 5. Okay, we're going to be done by 5, if not a little earlier, but we're going to be done by 5. So the bar will open at 5 for all of you from the community college world. For the higher education people, I know you're all going back to work, so it's okay. I mean, you know. And for the business guys, you can get 9 in before the dark after that, but it's getting dark a little bit early. So we've got a powerhouse panel up here. You've got their bios, so I'm not going to read all of them, but I am going to ask them just to go once around, introduce themselves again, because most of them introduce themselves. But just, I'm going to ask you in a minute what your full takeaways, what really raised the most questions from what you heard, but just initial, sort of response. And Beth, you somehow or another, I let you get away with being last time, so I'm going to make you get first this time. If you just tell the audience who you are, what you do on a daily basis, sure. And what questions did you hear raised?
Good afternoon. My name is Beth Brindley. I'm the Commissioner of the Department of Workforce Investment. I've been working in education, workforce development, and economic development at the local, state, and federal level for probably about 30 years.
Kentucky, right?
Mm-hmm. And, from the Commonwealth of Kentucky, if that accent didn't already give it away. One of the things that I really heard was the angst of redefining ourselves and how we find that purpose and retool our purpose to be relevant within the education, economic development, and workforce development realm.
Thanks.
Michael Moore, Vice President for Academic Affairs, University of Arkansas System. My day job, I guess, day-to-day job is anything to deal with the academic programs on each of our campuses, and specifically I'm charged with developing the university's new online strategy, something we're calling the eVersity. What I heard mostly this morning was obvious concern over funding, but really a willingness, I think, on the part of most of us to be entrepreneurial, to respond to the market, but really a concern that we're not given the freedom or the environment in which to do so. We need to address issues related to regulation and accreditation, and I think higher ed is equipped and prepared to respond if given the right tools to do so.
Good afternoon. I'm Walter Bumpus, President and CEO of the American Association of Community Colleges. We're located in Washington, D.C., and we represent approximately 13 million students, 1,132 community colleges, and we like to say that we have a community college in every congressional district in the country except one. I got my start in Arkansas, so for some of you in the audience, I've had the pleasure of knowing some of you for a long time. I was a 24-year-old dean of students up at Forest City, East Arkansas Community College. I've worked in Texas, and I'm from Kentucky. So that's my background.
Sounds good. Great.
I'm Grant Tennille. I'm the Executive Director of the Arkansas Economic Development Commission. And I just arrived from Alma, Arkansas, where I was spending time in what I think is one of the exemplars for what we've been talking about all morning here. A company that was essentially created as a spinoff of the Ag Department at the U of A and the Extension Service. We are the only state, we've got the only company in the country that is growing edamame for the purpose of selling edamame and not for some other soy product. And it's taken off like a rocket, and it wouldn't have happened without the partnership between what we do in ED and what the university does. So looking forward to talking a little bit about that.
My name's Leslie Boney, and I have a title that could only come about through 5 years of consecutive downsizing. I'm Vice President of International Community and Economic Engagement for the university system in North Carolina, which all makes sense to me, but it's a little hard to explain to people in a couple of words. It's basically the external-facing part of our university system. For starters, I'll talk a little bit later about what I did here, but let me just call attention to something I didn't hear all morning or early afternoon, and that is something I think it's really important to say, and I'm expecting immediate pushback or head shaking from various people, but I think it is undeniably true, and that is that we have a great product. People come from all over the world to buy our product, to study our product, to figure out what it is we're doing. The people who buy our product make, on average, about $1 million more over the course of their lifetime. Something happens as a result of the product that our higher education system produces, and that is remarkable, and none of that says anything about whether we need to change or not. I think we need to change dramatically, and I think we need to change more quickly than we want to change. But let's just start with admitting that we're pretty good at what we do. It doesn't mean we can't be better, but we are good, and so good that the rest of the world wants to do what we are already able to do. That's why we have to get better.
Okay.
My name is Jay Moon. I'm the president and CEO of the Mississippi Manufacturers Association. We're located in Jackson. We represent about 2,200 manufacturers, processors, and distributors of manufactured products. My background is about 25 years as an economic developer. I'm a certified economic developer, and in that role, we work very closely with the legislature, what I was speaking about before, in terms of trying to work with them on business-friendly legislation. I'm also the current chairman of the State Workforce Investment Board and the State Longitudinal Data System, which has been an interesting experience in setting that up. We might get into that a little bit later. One of the things I wanted to mention from the discussion this morning, and being one of the few private sector representatives here today, the State Workforce Investment Boards around the United States, those who are members of the board have to largely be composed of private sector representatives. And it's not because the private sector knows more about education or training. They're not necessarily experts in those areas, but they are experts in demand. And they know what they need, and they know what they are looking for in terms of training programs, whether they are provided by a trainer that they hire themselves, or whether they go through a community college or some other program. So I think that from my perspective, the combination of the public sector, educational institutions, and the private sector has to be better. It has to be more fully engaged, and it has to be ongoing. It can't be an afterthought. It's in that way, I think that what many of you in the room do from an educational standpoint will be better aligned with what the needs are in the private sector.
Good afternoon. I'm Brian Darmody, Associate Vice President for Corporate and Foundation Relations at the University of Maryland. And I used to be the lobbyist for the university. I worked on the Hill for a while, worked for a state delegate, and worked for the federal government and the private sector. So I've had a long experience at the university in a number of roles, but we're near Washington, D.C., and so when we say the SEC, we don't mean a football team, we mean the Securities and Exchange Commission. So that's just a bit perspective of the university and kind of where we're located, so we pay a lot of attention to things in Washington. And I want to echo what Leslie said about I think collectively we do need to be prouder about higher education. Just a quick comment, I work on some international projects and worked a lot with Russia on and it's kind of ironic given recent events, but this was a couple years ago, the U.S.-Russia Foundation. They wanted to restructure their higher education system where they have research divorced from education. And, and they recognized Stalin put that together, and it was dumb. You created very strong research institutes, but they had no connection to higher education. So they wanted to reform, and of course they came to the United States to develop that sort of model. Sergey Brin, who is the co-founder of Google, is a University of Maryland graduate in computer science that went to Stanford, and had he grown up in Russia and not emigrated, he could have never created Google, because he never would have been exposed to research at a university where he had some NSF-funded research that did page ranking on libraries, and of course that eventually led to Google. So I think it's important to understand the importance of research, and I think oftentimes elected officials at the state level don't understand that. They say, why aren't you doing more teaching? And I just need to call out the importance of basic research, because only universities are doing that. Private industry isn't doing that, and I think that's an important piece of our narrative about higher education.
Hi, my name's Joel Gordon, and I think I'm the black sheep up here. I have sort of a diverse background. I actually went to school. I became a scenic artist. I worked for Chicago Scenic Studios as a scenic lead for years. Freelanced in movies. I got to work on Spider-Man, cool things like that. But I realized at some point in my life that what I really was a frustrated educator trapped in a scenic artist's body. It just so happened that at one point in my career, I got to start to design exhibits for museums. And I began to understand that if you can present an idea, a process, and make it come alive in an object, there's something very special about that. And it really led me to this idea of making. I grew up in North Little Rock. I was a poor kid from Sherwood. And I moved back to Arkansas a few years ago and became the Director of Visitor Experience for Museum of Discovery. I did that for 8 years. And now I'm working on a project called the Launchpad in the Arkansas Regional Innovation Hub. And the one thing that I took away from what I've heard so far is basically how do we reinvent and innovate education? It's a huge question. And then how do we create that model that permeates from pre-K through higher education? That's a big piece to bite off. But somewhere during that conversation, it came up earlier, what does higher education offer? And it kind of came to me, and there's a quote that I really live by, and I think it's something that higher education really does better, even though we're there, I think, specifically to create career fields. There's something that we do, and I think it's best embodied. Antoine de Saint-Exupéry is the person who wrote The Little Prince, if any of you read that book. And there's a quote from him around World War II. He said, if you want to build a ship, don't gather people together and assign them tasks, but rather instill within them a longing for the immensity of the sea. And I think that's what higher education does. I think it gives people an opportunity to sort of realize that the world is bigger than them. And I think higher education does that really well.
Great, thanks. So the black sheep, so we're supposed to pick on you, right?
That's right.
Okay, well, good. Well, so we'll start. What didn't you hear this morning that you expected to hear? I know it's the afternoon, guys. I know it, but they are going to do morning. I'm going to do morning. So what didn't we hear that you thought when you had a conversation about higher ed that somebody talked about?
Well, it's interesting because I get to deal with this project that we're doing now. I do get to speak to a lot of government members. I get to speak to industry, and I get to speak to educators. K through 12, preschool, and I just had my first opportunity to work with a preschool 2 weeks ago. It was pretty exciting. A lot of educators come to me because I'm so outside of the box with what I do, and a lot of schools are really pushing for this idea of innovation, becoming an innovation school. And I hear teachers who are frustrated because they feel like they're boxed in. I hear industry is frustrated because they don't feel like they're getting out of the programs what they need. And then I hear government officials who sort of don't know which way to turn. And I think that it really boils down to communication. And I was sort of hoping at some point today that I would hear an answer. And I realize the more I listen to it that it's just a much more convoluted issue than I ever imagined. But the one thing that I did sort of expect to hear was more of a plan with bringing kids in from K through 12. And by that, what I mean is, I feel like there needs to be more focus. I think the world, these issues that we're talking about right now with becoming more specific with education, I don't think that's a new idea. I think it's actually a really old idea. I think that it's the idea of vocational technical. I think that, and 5 years ago, if I said this, I got fruit thrown at me, but I'll say it now. I don't think everyone needs to go to college. And the more I speak to industry, the more that I hear the answer from industry is that if they have the skills that we need right out of high school, we'll hire them. And that's an old idea. I mean, back in the 1950s, that's the way the world was. In the 1970s, when I was growing up, that's the way the world was. And at some point, it changed. And the thing that hurts me the most is I think at some point, we decided that blue collar was a dirty word. And we moved away from that idea of shop in school or going into a technical field. And this hallway of opportunity, this hallway full of doors that was always there for us, I think a lot of those doors got closed, and we threw the ones at the end of the hall open. And I really thought that I would hear more of, this is how we get these young people on that path. And I'm hearing the phrases that I've become used to, like pipeline. Get them on a pipeline, which is great, because I was definitely one of those kids who wandered around and struggled, which is why I feel like my mission now is to sort of help young people focus and get more on that path. But how do we get higher education more involved in K through 12 in a comfortable way, in a way that is engaging and exciting and motivates these kids, motivates these teachers into the kids who are going to make that path, the kids who are going to take that leap, and the kids who are going to take that leap into a two-year college or more of a technical field. But I'm not really hearing that yet.
Anybody else comment? Were you missing that, Walter?
Yeah, I'd like to first of all comment on Joel's comment, though. Typically, when I start to hear those conversations about who doesn't need to go to college, it's never about one's own family. It's about somebody else, maybe their kids don't need to go to college. But nevertheless, I won't dwell on that point. There were a couple things I didn't hear today, if that was the question, Ted.
That's the
I
question.
thought we would hear more about Common Core, at least some of the discussions about that. I don't think I heard a lot this morning.
It was a polite group.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's a controversial subject in some states. Innovation, early college, middle college, the proliferation of community colleges. They're offering baccalaureate degrees now, and what that might mean to the relationship between baccalaureate degree granting institutions and community colleges. The whole notion of the middle college and early college, I just think I thought there might have been some discussions on that, and so maybe we can talk a little bit about that as we go on today.
Yep.
One thing I think we also left out of the conversation a little earlier is the vast amount of talent that exists in all our states that started college, made the decision to go at some point, and then opted out for whatever reason. Life got in the way, family obligations got in the way. State of Arkansas, the number is 350-some thousand people have college credit without a baccalaureate degree or an associate's degree. We didn't talk about that all. When we're talking here about kids going from K-12 and kids this and kids that, that's what I was talking about earlier about there being multiple solutions and this being a very complex problem. Their higher ed is not monolithic. The industry needs are not monolithic. Almost all the governors that are going to come to this event here tomorrow and the president have all set these goals, these lofty goals for 2025. And we will not meet any of those goals with the existing population of students going into college. We have to broaden the pipeline and get adults who did not finish back into college and make good on finishing that dream, helping them accomplish that. And it may not be through the existing institutions, or we may have to have some institutions that focus specifically on that. But we don't meet Governor Beebe's goal by, we could all increase our retention rates, pick some arbitrary number you want, 10%, 15%. Those are Herculean kinds of increases in graduation rates and retention rates. We will not solve this problem. We have to broaden the pipeline, and it's not kids that fix that problem.
Beth?
A few other themes that I think we didn't hear. One was about data-driven decision-making in regard to the use of our resources.
What happened to that analytics discussion that you always get? I didn't hear that at all.
I think another one, and it leads to what Michael touched on, and the whole idea of student confidence and their ability to succeed within the higher education community at large. and then the whole idea of integrated education and training. Someone did talk about developmental ed, but I didn't hear a lot of conversation about what's been going on with integrated basic skills, with technical skills, leading to certificates, degrees, and credentials.
Brian, what didn't you hear?
I thought we'd hear a little bit more about tech transfer and innovation. I mean, you showed some of your analysis from NSF, but I mean, clearly a lot of, I think elected officials are interested in that. And if you look at the data about job creation, which everyone's interested in, you know, there's always debate, is it small businesses or is it large businesses that create jobs? It's actually young businesses that create, you know, small businesses create a lot of jobs, but they shed a lot of jobs. It's actually young businesses that are responsible for net job growth. And so infusing students not just to take a job, but make a job, I think is one of the ways higher ed, through programs like Joel's and certainly at Maryland, you know, we created a goal of 325 new jobs to be created through the university system over a 10-year period. Where did we come up with that number? We sort of made it up. I think we stole it from Michigan, who had 100. We said, we're going to triple that. Anyway, that drove a lot of different things. It drove a change in our tenure policy, so patents could count towards tenure. It drove, you know, faculty who, you know, generally are supportive to actually think about that. It drove students, it drove student affairs to start thinking like I mentioned the entrepreneur storm. So it drove a lot of things, but it was, you know, at the leadership level, and I think it created a lot of alignment with the public officials and the university.
Leslie, you were part of a process at the University of North Carolina to go out all across the state and ask communities what they wanted from higher education. Very brave thing. They went everywhere to every little nook and corner and said, what do you want from us? Very, very navel gazing. And what do communities, what do regular people, when you go to them, what do they say they want from their higher education system?
Well, it was interesting. The first thing we had to do was tell all the university people that when you go, you can't talk.
Talk, right, yes.
So that shortened the meetings by a little bit. But they said a couple of interesting things. And one thing that seemed to be coming up a lot this morning was this notion of perfectly matching the workforce to the demands of the workplace. And it was fascinating to me that we didn't hear that much of that. We heard that we were doing a pretty good job of equipping people with the hard skills they need, the basic knowledge. But the critique we got was really in two categories. One, that because of competition and the shortening business cycle, they needed people to come out of universities with some work experience. And in the past, there used to be sort of training programs that would be in place. You'd have 2 or 3 years to whip somebody into shape. And now that time window's gone away. And so that's a responsibility that seems to be devolving toward higher ed. But the other thing that we heard a lot of was what has been one of the fundamental long-term arguments of universities, which is that we can't have perfect knowledge. We can't have perfect market knowledge. And so when we did a survey of the people we talked to, the top 4 things that came up from businesses that they wanted from university graduates. Number 1, adaptability, which if you think what's been happening in the business world, everybody's world has been blown up in the last 10 years at least once, sometimes twice. So what you want is somebody not who can do exactly what you're currently doing, but who's going to help you figure out how to do the next thing, which you know is going to be there, you just don't know what it is. Number 2, effective communication. We got an earful that we don't graduate people with nearly good enough communication skills. Looking somebody in the eye, communicating, we're much better over electronic media than we are making an argument on paper or in person. Number 3, learning agility, which I think is closely related to versatility, adaptability. And number 4, multicultural awareness. So those were the issues that came up, and that was not the list I would have projected when we first started looking at this. So when I hear market responsiveness and I think about what's happened to the market in the last 10 years, if we'd responded to the market of 2004 and dumped all our majors and completely rejiggered our manufacturing plants to produce fiber optics everywhere, then we'd be set with a system that really wasn't ready. So I think it's important to realize on some level, and this would be my advice to governors too, that this cannot be an exclusive short-term proposition. That's not what universities do. Somebody was talking about a manufacturing plant that closed in North Carolina, and they were asking what the difference was between community colleges and universities, and mine was, well, community college would come in and say they could retrain everybody who was just laid off, and a university would come in and say, give us 5 years and we'll tell you what just happened. So there is a fundamental responsiveness problem that universities have. We're not as responsive as we need to be, and we need to get a lot better. But it also makes the point that we are essentially a longer-term investment. We're investing in people who we think are going to invent the future. And it's not necessarily, one quick question for everybody. How many people are currently working in the field that your undergraduate major prepared you for?
Oh, you said prepared. I'm sorry. I took it, but I don't know about prepared.
I'm going to go with 5%.
Yeah.
We surveyed our governing board. We did an informal survey of our governing board the other day and found that roughly 30% of them were working in the field that their undergraduate major prepared them for. And they are the leaders of our state. Now, if you went strictly on a long-term and on a short-term investment, you would say that psychology degree that our board chair has is useless because he's not practicing in psychology. But he's our board chair, and he's one of the most successful attorneys in the state. So I do think this long-term, short-term thing is something we have to figure out.
And by the way, you didn't just go to Charlotte and Raleigh. You went out to Cullowhee and down to Pembroke and out to Elizabeth City, and you heard the same thing all over the state, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Grant, when you talk to a prospective business who's looking in Arkansas, does that resonate the same type of things you hear from business?
It does. I'll tell you, following along with what Joel said, the thing that I was surprised not to hear more of, and I wasn't here for all of it, but if we walked out on the street in front of this hotel right now and surveyed people passing by about what are the innovative sectors of our economy, 99% of them would talk to you about IT. And we're all scrambling around trying to figure out what the 22-year-old soon-to-be millionaires want. Where do you want to live? What do you want to do? That's where everybody's focused. And I've spent a lot of time talking to a lot of those young people, and we've got more of them here in Arkansas than I think everybody thinks we do, largely because of the presence of Axiom and Walmart and 2 or 3 other very large companies. You talk to those kids right now, and I just left some of them, they'll tell you, they're telling people don't go to college. Don't go. You can make more money straight out of high school than you'll ever realize by taking 4 years off to go to college. But when we were putting this whole weekend together, the entire purpose of why we're here is a recognition that that's not the only innovative sector of the economy, A. B, that back to the point that somebody else made, tech transfer is a critical component of how you build an economy. And I spoke about it a few moments ago. I mean, that was tech transfer of a soybean. Well, that doesn't sound exciting or high tech, but, these guys are running a business, and the growth model for their sector looks like 200% a year. They promised us they'd hire 50 people. They're going on 200. They've been there for 2 years. And so, there is a disconnect. And there's a fundamental disconnect between what parents think the next step for their kids ought to look like, what the kids think their next step ought to look like, and then what the employers think that the system ought to be turning out for them. And, I'm a liberal arts graduate, and I hazard a guess that there are a number of us in here. The basic proposition gets back to what Leslie was just telling us. What businesses want are people who can learn more than one time. That's what they want. And that's never changed. And it never will change. The problem that we're facing right now, especially on the manufacturing side, is in order to manufacture in the United States at a profitable level, you don't want very many people working for you. And now the starting job is no longer dependent on your strong back and ability to stand there and pull a lever for 8 or 9 hours a day. You got to understand how to program and service the machine that doesn't have a lever anymore. And so what we used to call work ready coming out of high school isn't what work ready looks like now. And somebody has got to step into that role. And right now, for better or worse, it's you guys. I mean, that's who we're all looking to say, okay, the minimum wage and slightly above job in American manufacturing looks totally different than it did even 10 years ago. And nobody's teaching these skills. So who's going to do it?
I think we tell people that we say all the time that everybody needs more education. Well, everybody needs more skills. I buy. I don't know if I buy everybody needs more education if you're talking about the way we used to think about it. I think it's different. Now, Walter, I mentioned earlier that the community college system had a pretty aggressive plan to form community colleges, and it was market-driven, but it was also transformational. I was there with you when you announced it, but I don't know how it's been received. Are you making headway?
Oh, absolutely. Just a little bit about the Reclaiming the American Dream report that Ted is referencing. We released the report in 2012, and it was really in response to, in many ways, rightful criticism we were getting about the low graduation and completion rates in community colleges. So I convened a commission of 38 people, primarily chancellors and presidents, but also some of what I would call friendly critics. We had Britt Curran from University of Maryland system. We had Nancy Zimfer from the SUNY system, amongst others that joined us. And we got together, talked about what could we do, and I'll go to a point that Ted mentioned earlier. I think he talked about reimagining, but we had what we call 3 R's: reinvent, reset, and redesign community colleges. We had 3 R's, 7 recommendations, 22 strategies, but they were all geared towards making community colleges more productive, more responsive to the business community and so forth. And I have to say to you, of all the work I've done in my 40-year career, I've never done anything that has received such applause as that report. In fact, I've not had one critic come forward. In the report, recommendation number 1 talked about all community colleges needed to increase our graduation rates by 50% by 2020. If you recall, and many of us in higher education, 4-year and 2-year, got a challenge from President Obama in 2010 to graduate more undergrads, more certificates, more degrees, so we could return ourselves to our rightful place in the world order of having the most educated citizenry in the world. And in community colleges, I'm thrilled to tell you, we've started to actually monitor where are we now, because we challenged every college. And we did an assessment about 3 weeks ago about where we were around the country in aggregate, and we're now looking at where each state is at this point. But based on the research we had, we've increased over a 2-year period 55,000 more associate degrees that were awarded, 44,000 more certificates that were awarded. In essence, an 8.9% increase, if you will, in the productivity. I don't ever want to be in a position, hopefully, for community colleges that we can have to be embarrassed by our results. And I've not run into a president yet. I went out and did a listening tour across the country. 2011, we visited with 1,300 people in 10 regions of the country. And most presidents told me, I want to be accountable, but by the right metrics. Unfortunately, for many community colleges, and I'll throw that out there as a challenge for us to consider, We are evaluated oftentimes on the number of first-time, full-time freshmen, when something like almost 70% of our students are part-time. So when you have that as your measuring stick, we just need to have the right metrics. We're evaluated on how many of our students finish in 150% time. And for those of you that are not familiar with 150% time, for 2-year colleges, that's 3 years. For 4-year colleges, that's 6 years. Well, our rates are horrible sometimes. But when you start to evaluate us over maybe a 7 or 8 year period, the rates go up. And in fact, most times they're very similar to many 4-year colleges when you consider the time difference. Unfortunately, and it's back to the college readiness question, and I'll shut it down in just a second, 60 and 70% of students that enter community colleges go into developmental education. Many of those students, unfortunately, end up spending a year, 18 months, 2 years in developmental education before they ever get into the curriculum. And so for us, that's been a challenge, and for a lot of universities, that's a challenge. So we're working hard on trying to accelerate more students through developmental education. Complete College America is working with a number of governors now and suggesting that maybe students don't need developmental education. The state of Florida has now gone away from that. If you graduate, I believe, from high school since 2007, you don't have to go into developmental education. In essence, you can opt out. And so I think the jury's still out on that and how effective that's going to be. But those are some of the things that we've done. And I'll tell you, we're getting great results around the country. I haven't visited a college recently where I always ask the question, how are you doing with graduation? What are your completion rates looking like? And most colleges I'm visiting right now, the trends are up, graduation's up, enrollments are flat, in some cases down a little bit. But overall, colleges appear to be doing better.
But Walter, I would say some of what I'm hearing from the business community is they're sort of disinterested in what your graduation rate is. What they seem to be more interested in is, are you creating the people I need? And I'll take them after 6 weeks if you get them what they got to have. Yeah. And so
I couldn't have a better straight man. Can I respond to that?
Go ahead.
We had a guy named Jim Ryan. Some of you may know Jim in Illinois. He's president and CEO of Granger. Jim was on our commission. And Jim got everyone's attention one day when he said, you know, Walter, I think these graduation rates discussions are interesting. He said, matter of fact, whose idea was it? Was it Gates's idea, Department of Ed, or President's ideas to talk about completion and graduation rates? He said, I would rather a college had a 40 or 50% graduation rate, I don't care, but 100% job placement rate. And those folks that came to work were work ready. And boy, he had all kind of reactions to that, but I thought it was a powerful point. But I said it doesn't have to be either or. No. It can be both and. And that's where I think the real product, the real magic of what happens in our education institutions has to happen.
I hear this all the time where I go to community colleges and they say, look, we hate this program because people hire everybody before they finish and we get punished for it.
Cherry picking some cases.
Say, what? They say, no, they get good jobs, but they don't finish, so everybody thinks we screwed up.
Yep.
But I think that also gets back to all of the questions all of us have about how technology can transform higher education and also what the cost is. I mean, you know, do you have to go and be there and pay a bunch of tuition to get what you need out of that in order to turn it into a job?
But to the point you might want to make to governors, that may be something they want to consider. Because when they start talking about performance-based funding, they're not necessarily looking at your performance of placing people in jobs. They still want to know what's your graduation rate,
needs to
and
be
that's
nuanced.
high on the list, so that's something we might want to think
Michael,
about.
did you want to jump in on this? If not, I'm going to take you off on a technology tangent.
Take me off on technology.
So you're in charge of some of the online presence stuff. So I go out and I talk to higher education people all the time, and you know, when they hear tech, I get this immediate pushback on online, and I get everybody's nose turns up immediately at how terrible it is, how it's a terrible way of learning, it's not well done, it's all, and people sort of just go, my mother's words, they just poo-poo it. And yet when I talk to younger than me people, and they say, well, how do you get information in life? They go, well, you go online. And there's a schism there that I'm missing. I don't understand what it is. Help me.
Okay. Complicated question with
Yeah, I know.
complicated answer. There is a difference, I think, between fully online courses and technology-enabled courses. I think that's an important distinction, first of all. And the research actually doesn't bear out what the critics that you mentioned suggest. The research from the Department of Education and others shows that learning outcomes in online courses are just as effective, if well-designed, as face-to-face courses. I have a joke I kind of say sometimes: online learning begins in the 12th row. Right, in the big freshman classroom, that's where it happens. That you have the participants up front, the people at the back in the 300-seat auditorium. That's distance learning. That's as ineffective as this. We've all had bad face-to-face instructors. We've all had horrible face-to-face instructors, and we've had people that have inspired us in the classroom. The same thing can happen online. It's not about the mode of delivery. It is about the quality of the instruction. Now, it's true, there are some things we don't do well online, and we shouldn't try to do them. It's very difficult to do basic research, as was mentioned up here. There's some things in upper division chemistry courses I wouldn't want to even attempt to do online. But what we do online today is very different than what we could have done 10 years ago. Technology evolves, it continues to allow us to do things. So we need to be very careful about how we have this conversation and be smart about the things that we want to put in a fully online environment. Part of the mistake, I think, that has happened for institutions that have decided to put things in a fully online environment is they think it's as simple as putting the course online, and that's not the solution. The reason you have these high dropout rates sometimes in your online programs is because for all the challenges you have on a campus where you have academic advisors available, tutors, mentors, counselors, all these things around, you have to now move those things online as well. So we can do graduate programs online really, really well without putting a lot of resources, because those people have already graduated. They know how to navigate the educational process. Undergraduate programs, technical programs, certificate programs, associate degrees, you've got to make a significant investment in that and dedicate entire institutions to do that if you want to do it well. University of Maryland, University College does an outstanding job of doing that because they've decided to support students in that particular way. That's what we're going to intend to do with our effort here. That's different than a technology-enabled classroom. And when you start talking about the 18-year-olds that are coming to our college campuses, all you have to do is start to look at what a 5- and a 6-year-old is doing right now, and they know how to operate the iPhones and the iPads. And if we have faculty members in our classrooms whose first statement is, when they get to the classroom, is, "Put your device away," we have lost them. Instead, the first statement should be, "Get your device out." We're going to enable that device in the classroom. We're going to use that device. We're going to build learning analytics into the classroom. There's some technology that's emerging now that allows the faculty members, using certain software that students use to capture lectures, that they can tell when students have stopped taking notes. So they can go back then and look at their lecture. Well, what time was that in my lecture? What was I talking about? Where did I lose them? Was it confusing? Was it boring? Was it something they didn't get? Where were they really interested in typing a lot of notes? When did they leave me and go look at Facebook or play a game online? That's how we need as faculty members to start using it. Amazon tells you within a fraction of a second after you purchase something else you ought to buy, because they're using analytics to make those decisions. We have a wealth of, and I'll stop on this, will be my last point.
No, I'm good.
We have a wealth of information in higher education, a tremendous wealth of information about our students. We talk to them during the admission process, and we find out that they're divorced, and they've got 2 kids at home, and they're working a job. And they maybe have a child that has special needs or soccer practice. And the admission officer has a conversation about that. That does not enter any other record in the university. They submit a financial aid form. They fill out the FAFSA. We find out about their income level, that it's low. We find out the number of dependents. We find out that they're going to struggle to meet the tuition. There's going to be a big gap. But it's not the price of education so much as what's called the affordability gap. They have ability to play. But you know what? We don't share that information with anybody outside the financial aid office. Academic advisors will talk to students about the need to drop a class because they're not doing real well, but they won't know that if they do so, it drops the student below full-time financial aid status and they're going to lose money. And worst of all, the faculty member who is responsible for delivering the education content does not know on the first day of the class whether or not that student struggled in mathematics in high school and has dropped math twice before, and they're sitting in their college algebra class. Why do we wait till the midterm when they're finally tanked in the class and have probably psychologically decided, it's time to leave, I can't do this, I've quit? We need to tell them on day one. We need to send them a resource and let them know, not profiling them in the sense that, hey, you've had a trouble with this in the past, here's some tutoring, but be proactive about it. Say, we see you're enrolled in math this semester. We've got free tutoring available in mathematics. Bob's your tutor this semester. Here's his phone number and email. He's going to contact you in the first 24 hours, and then have Bob reach out to it. If the student wants to refuse that assistance, that's fine. They have the freedom to do that. It's also good for us on the administration side because it allows us to more effectively allocate these resources that are increasingly scarce. We all talked a while ago about declining state resources. We can't afford to tutor everybody. Let's allocate the tutoring and the advising to the people that need it. Let me give you, I said I was going to shut up, but I'm not. I'm going to have one more point. I don't really believe that academic success on college campuses needs to be all that hard. And let me use a quick analogy here. Think of your elite football program in all of your states. Take whatever state you're from, your flagship program, and the athletic program there, the basketball program, the football program, and think about the pass rate of those athletes. How many of them end up in academic probation? Does the NCAA ever take away scholarships from the flagship institutions in your state? Occasionally there's an exception. The answer is no, they don't, they pass. Now think about the institution that's a third-tier institution in your state. They end up on sanction by the NCAA for something called APR failure. It's not that the athletes that go to the third-tier school are any dumber than the ones that went to the flagship school. It's that their arms are 2 inches shorter, they're half a second slower in the 40, they don't lift as much. They're not as gifted athletically. They're every bit the same academic student. They all meet the NCAA minimum requirements. That's the standard. So why does the one at the flagship succeed and the other one not? It's because the flagship schools can wrap them around with academic advisors and tutors for every class that they're in, and the other schools cannot afford to do so. And these are inexpensive resources for an institution. Tutors, advisors are not expensive in the whole scheme of things. It's about resource allocation. We can solve this problem if we allocate those resources correctly.
You don't care about the subject.
I don't care
no.
about technology-enabled learning at all. I hate it.
So I probably should have said this before you spoke, but in a few minutes we're going to let people react to what y'all said. But so technology. Anybody else want to jump in on the sort of fear and loathing of?
Yeah, I'll do that. One of the things that I address quite a bit is technology and the idea of teaching kids to code and program, and that's what employers are looking for. That's what universities want to teach. When I was in school, I struggled with school. I had a lot of trouble with school. I talked to teachers a lot, and I always like to lead it up with, I scored a solid 19 on my ACT. But the same month I took the ACT, I also took the ASVAB. Do you guys remember that one? So I took the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery and scored in the top 10% in the nation. So where was I? Turned down Annapolis. But I have kids today that I see them struggling with school, and then these same kids are going home, and this is absolutely true. I had a friend of mine who works in industry here. He came to me the other day, and he said, I need somebody who can do JavaScript, CAD, and work with hardware. And I said, I got him. And he goes, great, I'll hire him tomorrow. And I said, well, he's 15. Without missing a beat, he said, when's he turn 16? That was it. So, but this young man learned that on his own, and he did it online. He did it with these technical studies. One of the things that I bring up a lot in school, and immediately teachers are terrified of it, is the idea of a flipped classroom. So, really what that is more the way you learn in university. You go in university and you begin to take your lab classes. You work with your teacher. You're hands-on learning something. What we do now is kids come into class, the teachers lecture to them, they go home and they have to do their homework, and they bring it to mom and dad, and I don't know half the things that my kids needed needed my help with. And then they're going in the next day to school, they're turning in their homework. So that idea of a flipped classroom is let the teacher work with them on what they're doing. Let them sit down and approach that class like a lab. They get firsthand knowledge where that child is struggling. They understand it's not that they don't know the math, they don't understand this part of it. It's not that they're not getting grammar, it's they're confused on this. And those same kids can go home at night with an assignment, get on your smartphone and look at Khan Academy. Take a look at this. There are millions of online resources out there. And I think one of the really unfortunate things is that we maybe have dropped the ball on showing a lot of schools that these opportunities exist. And they're frightened of terms like flipped classroom. They're frightened of the technology because to them it's this entity that they don't understand.
Jay, the other thing that scares people to death is when we say, well, you just need to listen to business more. They'll tell you what they need. And it occurs to me that Governor Bryant decided to let the wolf in the chicken house when he let the head of the Manufacturers Association be the chair for the workforce system. He basically said, wolves rule. So that shouldn't scare people either, right? If they're trying to create a product that meets industry needs, that should be a good thing. But do you feel the pushback? Do you see, when you go in to talk to workforce people or you talk to educators about what business need, how does it work today?
Well, I find it to be pretty well accepted. Let me mention a concept that's in manufacturing today. It's called competitive positioning. And what that means is that manufacturers look at every aspect of their operation and they determine where they can get the best value and the best return on that investment. That may not all be in one location. So what they do is they go and they find what they need. So if it's not in a school, if it's not a community college, or if it's not an institution of higher learning, a university, then they're going to do the training themselves. And studies have shown that 80% of the training that's being done in any given state in the country is being done by the business community themselves. And that's because they get what they invest in. So that's an important point here. And I wanted to mention something about, we've talked a lot about the young men and women that get to community college or maybe go on to university. There's a whole group that we haven't talked about, and I mentioned this in the introduction, that, and obviously there are issues there. They have to be tutored and they're not ready to learn, that sort of thing. The average in all the states in the country is 33% of students are dropping out of high school. All right, so they don't have that first credential in life. They don't have an ability in my state to go to work for Toyota or Nissan or Caterpillar because they don't even have a GED or high school education. So we talk about career awareness, why students go to college or don't go to college, or too many of them being advised to go to college. And the problem that we've seen, and we've done some studies on it, young men and women in grade school, a lot of times are getting their best recommendations come from their parents on what they want to be in life, right? They don't know what careers are out there. And so you look at a lot of rural schools, which we have more of them in this country than urban schools, and you have somebody who's the basketball coach, they're the history teacher, and they're a guidance counselor. And they don't have the tools, and they don't know how to recommend to young men and women where they need to go and what they need to do with their lives, so they say go to college, right? So one of the things that many of the states are doing, many communities are doing on their own, is developing career awareness programs that reach down into the 5th and 6th grade. Because studies also show that a lot of times that someone who drops out of high school is not because they're not performing. They don't see the relevancy of what they're doing there. You have to create an environment where they stay in school long enough to get into a dual credit or a dual enrollment program or get on some kind of a career track that will take them where they need to go in life. And then they can add those credentials as they go along. Just yesterday I was telling Walter, I was down on Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, and they've just started a new program with Mississippi State University, big engineering school. As soon as a student enrolls in an engineering program at Gulf Coast Community College on the coast, they're automatically enrolled in Mississippi State's engineering program. They take 2 years of courses on the coast and then 2 more with Mississippi State, and it's almost all done online at that point. So what we're doing is we're creating an environment where the students are. We're solving what Stephen mentioned before. That's a career area that there's a lack of engineers in. And we're tying 2 different aspects of the educational world to meet a private sector demand. So we've got to think a little bit differently in terms of how we put our assets together, how we bring our resources to bear on some of this. And I think the business community will support that, but they want to see value. And if they don't see value, they'll go to where they can find the value.
So I want to tie what Joel and Jay have been talking about, the interest of students to actually make things. And, this is a phenomenon I'm only recently became familiar with, hackathons. So who knows what a hackathon is? So, a lot of people think it means it's students compete and they try to hack into computers. No, it's really a competition about making things. And what's amazing is there's this whole subculture of students that, they self-organize these things on weekends and they compete and they spend a heck of a lot of time. And universities, my university, we provide space and corporations, the smart ones, realize this is the kind of place they want to recruit from. So they do some sponsorship, they buy some pizzas, although now ours was so organic, they said, no, we're going to have hummus, no pizzas. We wanted to have a healthy hackathon. So, but anyway, it's a really interesting phenomenon, and it really is part of the innate, they want to make stuff, and it's also competitive, and it's a pretty interesting culture. And I know that it's cool because we had a problem where high school students wanted to come, and the question was, can high school students come to the hackathon? It's sort of like an interesting phenomenon. And so, capturing that. And what's really interesting, we have no big program. I mean, these students are self-assembling, and they're doing it all across the country. And I think tapping into that is a pretty interesting something to think about.
I want to follow up on that and get back to something that Jay said. Like every other southern state, we're in the middle of a pretty deep dive on all of these issues right now. And the game that I like to play when I'm out talking to audiences is, how many of you in this room want your child, your grandchild, or your niece or nephew to go into industrial maintenance? And nobody's hand in the room ever goes up, ever. Then I say, what if I told you that I know of some job openings right now, 50 miles from here, that will pay a qualified industrial maintenance technician $120,000 a year? And everybody goes, really? So much of this is about that communication that's been described. It's about letting the high school kid into the hackathon. It's about exposing both children and their parents to a whole lot of information, not only about what's available out there, but what the path to get to that place is. And, it's down to the old, some people shouldn't go to college. Oh, bullshit. What everybody needs is a robust curriculum, pre-K through 12, and a ton of information about what the next option looks like. I mean, I talk to my kids all the time, and what I keep saying to them over and over and over again is, and I've got one who's going to be a freshman in college, one who's going into the 6th grade, and one who's going into the 3rd grade. And I keep telling them, your only job at this point is not to close out your options. Your only job is to keep doing well enough that every choice is still available to you. That's it. I mean, it's not even, you got to learn your multiplication tables. Yeah, you got to learn your multiplication tables, but you got to learn your multiplication tables so that you're not like your dad taking Algebra 2 again in his senior year of high school. I guess I turned out okay, but, I was a hideous math student. It's that communication that has really broken down over time. And some of it comes back to the fact that the guidance counselor is also the history teacher, is also the basketball coach. Or what we've found here in Arkansas is our guidance counselors have primary responsibility for testing, for social work, and for keeping the peace in the hall. They don't have any time to guide anybody to do anything. Just not happening. So nobody's talking to these kids about, okay, what are you interested in?
That's one of the things. The National Association of Manufacturers developed a program. There's several nuts, bolts, and thingamajigs, but Dream It, Do It is one of those programs that you can adopt locally. You can put the program into the grade schools, into the high schools, and begin to provide some of those resources to the parents, the guidance counselors, the students, and the teachers. one of the things we did in setting that up in Mississippi was we partnered with our public broadcasting system and developed a series of programs called the Job Hunter Series. Nobody in there looks like me. It's all young people. And they're going out and they're talking to people on the Nissan line or the Eurocopter line or whatever it is about, well, how did you get in here? Well, I went to the local community college. I got an associate's degree. I'm making $85,000 a year. I got great benefits. I'm doing great. That kind of thing, because it's exactly what Grant was saying. You've got to show role models, and young people respond these days to different kinds of stimulus, and that's the kinds of things that are reflected in this program. And so we took 9 different categories of development within the state in terms of manufacturing areas. You didn't have to move to the coast if you were in the northern part of the state, or move from one part of the state to the other, because there were opportunities all over the state, and we began to tell them what these were. With the Jobs for Mississippi graduates then took these programs and developed curriculum around the programs. So instead of going in and today we're going to learn about algorithms and everybody goes to sleep, it's let's talk about what kind of math you use to build a jet airplane or a Nissan or a fast car and that kind of thing. And you begin to change the dynamics within the classroom. You give them something to grab onto and maybe a direction.
Beth, I've got a hopefulness, but I'm always confused by the fact that I can drive through rural Arkansas and ask my smartphone who has what's the closest place with country fried steak, and it will tell me. And yet we don't seem to be able to get information to parents and students about careers and education. I'm lost. Education, I mean, the information stuff just floods. Is it too much? Is it that we haven't focused it? Is it, why can't we get that?
Well, we're actually working on that in Kentucky. We're working on a tool called Focus Explorer, and there are probably 5 or 6 other states across the country who are developing their model of Focus Explorer. And what it talks about is the whole idea of taking an individual's skills and analyzing those skills and asking what their interests are, and helping them also identify those transferable skills. I'll give you a great example. An auto worker who loses their job oftentimes is a great transfer student to health technology fields, right? And so knowing that those folks can make those connections and then say, where are the institutions where all the different types, whether it's through a work-based adult education program, whether it's through a community college, whether it's through a private institution, whether it's through a university, and those components that they need to get to where they want to go. And the opportunity to have it be available to that parent, to that student, to that career advisor in the workforce center, to the career advisor in a university or a community college or those types of things, that takes the real world data, the real labor market demand as well, and says, what's your real opportunity where I am in this region for that opportunity to flourish, and let me stay here, grow here, and meet the demand.
Are we just on the edge? Because Jay, you've got a pocket on your phone. You've got the Mississippi job stuff that, you know, anybody with a smartphone can. I mean, are we just at the precipice of technology really, really helping us on these issues? Is we just almost there, but not quite yet?
I think we're moving there, and what he's talking about is a program that we've developed that if you're somebody that is interested in a job, you can list all of your career, your training, your skill levels, and so forth, and then an employer can go in and list jobs that they have available, and they can actually meet anonymously in a virtual sort of way and determine whether they want to meet actually, and then begin to bring those two together. And tying in with what you were saying in terms of looking at where are you, what are the opportunities in the immediate area, and do my skills lend themselves to some of those opportunities?
And, you know, talking about technology and being right on the edge, and I'm betting all of my colleagues here do the same sorts of things. When we're trying to help a company identify workforce, one of the things that we're capable of doing is saying, not only, here are the people who have exactly what you need and here's where they are, we can also tell them, and we do, here are the people who have 90% of what you need, who are currently underemployed, And if we can get your pitch in front of them, some of them will leave the job they're in, go skill up another 5%, and go to work for you for more money. And that's the kind of thing that technology is driving. But to get back to a point that was made a moment ago, I think a lot of it comes down to not just what are their skills, it's what is their interest. And one of the divides that I think we've got to find a way to help bridge is there are kids now interested in things that their parents don't even know exist as real job opportunities.
Yes.
And so, no, you don't want to do that. Go get, your BA and whatever, and, because there's a job.
Have you all noticed we've become politically correct that we don't actually want to name a major anymore because we're afraid we'll offend it?
Yeah.
Because, okay.
Right.
If I can elaborate on that, and this is kind of the other side of the coin, and this is actually for Charlotte, if she's here. I had an experience about a year and a half ago with Caterpillar when I was still working with Museum Discovery, Caterpillar gave us a fantastic grant. Wonderful opportunity. I had a chance to teach 40 girls, and I wanted to do an engineering course that was focused on women. So I had 40 young ladies. It was a 7-week program. I had them for 1 day a week, and just as a personal experiment, I did 2 classes. So I did 20 girls in one class, 20 girls in another class. When I approached Caterpillar, what I had originally wanted to do was concentrate on coding, programming using microprocessors. We were concentrating on Arduino and maybe get into robotics. So they said, that sounds great. What else you got? And I said, okay, how about structural design, CAD? And they went, awesome. What else? So every week we approached a different discipline. They got a little taste of something, a little hors d'oeuvre platter of different aspects of engineering. One class, I purposely approached lots of teachers that I knew, and I said, I'm looking for 20 girls who want to do this. It's free opportunity. So, of course, when you talk to the teachers, you get, the favorite students. You get the ones that they're like, these girls, they need to be in this class. The other class, I took 20 girls from the playground group, which is an incredibly under-resourced program. So I had this incredible dichotomy, and I got to balance that data out. And I asked them all the same questions, gave them all the same things. The first day of class, I asked them to write down 3 adults that they know and what their jobs are. I said, I don't want to know what the relationship is. I just want to know what their jobs are. So it gave me an idea of what they'd been exposed to. Across the board, in fact, over 85% in my young ladies who were in the under-resourced side, it was fast food, across the board. So that's the thing, is that a lot of these kids, and we forget, these are the careers they're exposed to. I had one young woman, we had one day, I brought my own welding equipment in, and we had an opportunity I had to take them for a few minutes at a time, but they basically got to blast some scrap steel together, for a few minutes. And one young lady came to me after that class, and she said, can girls really do this for a living? And that told me right off the bat, number one, you don't even realize women can do anything, so yeah, of course you can. The next thing she asked me without missing a beat was, can you make a lot of money doing this? And I said, sure, you start at $18 an hour. And then her next question kind of surprised me, and it was, do I need to go to school? And I said, yeah, you're gonna have to go to school. And she said, well, how much? And I said, well, it's 6 months to get a certificate. And she goes, no, I get $18 an hour. And I said, yeah. And I said, but if you really want to make money, I said, you need to go to a 2-year program. And I mentioned Pulaski.
Yeah, I was going to say, you need to get her name to Margaret, because we actually have a lady welder who is now also the president of a college here.
That's right. I immediately went to that.
Dr. Ellerby.
That's
You're
right.
a welder?
That's
Cool.
right. But I was just going to say, so the result of that was she was exposed to something that she'd never been. This was a career path that she had no idea existed, and I think too often we think that we're exposing them, and
We're not. Yeah.
We're just not.
It's not done. Finish and then
I gotta
next.
say first that my friends from UA Fort Smith are in the room, but I have friends from our other two-year schools, and I know this is happening everywhere, but where I saw it was at Fort Smith. I audited a concurrent enrollment class in computer animation. The coolest thing about that class was that it had both the kids that you would expect and the kids you wouldn't expect. So of the kids who got pulled out of Fort Smith Southside to go audit this class or got the opportunity to do it, there were the AB calculus kids. I mean, the kids you're assuming are in this stuff. But there were also the kids whose light bulb had never gone off for anything else. They were there because they thought, and still do, and some of them are right, that this is the key for how they're going to get to go to work for EA Sports or any of the big video game manufacturers. And these are kids that have no role model for academic success, have never had academic success, but they're interested and driven. And the cool thing is they're going to graduate with a high school diploma and a 2-year degree. And the crazy thing is, even if they don't go to work for EA or one of those guys, there is massive demand in manufacturing for these people to make training videos. And you know, I learned that there are people doing this for trial lawyers now and making a bunch of money doing it. So, you know, again, it's not either this or this. It's a lot more of both all of the time. I mean, we just got to pound them.
Michael, jump in.
Just real briefly on this, the 2 points here really illustrate what I was going to say. As much as I advocate technology, at the end of the day, this is about people intervening to help change lives. And these students who get this spark lit on them then are going to run into an admissions process that is complicated on campus and a financial aid process that has no one in their life to help them navigate it. And when they have a struggle in a class and they don't know whether to drop it or not, that's where people intervene. We can have all the technologies and all the websites to push this information to people, and we need to do that. And I don't worry about the hackathon kids. They're going to be great. They're going to succeed. They've got people in their lives pushing them, and we need to provide those opportunities. But folks are distributed along the bell curve. And the bulk of the middle and the people on the other end of the tail, they're the ones that we are having the trouble getting through. The people on the high end of the tail, they're going to be fine. They can navigate this process. And we really need to look at ways to simplify, to broaden the pipeline, increase access, to make this process more navigable and affordable for people. Technology can't fix all that.
So in North Carolina, Leslie's one of those people who people call and say, what do you think about this? Right? Happens, right? So everywhere I go, and I get to travel a lot, and it's fun because, like Grant, you hear just great stories. You know, there's a great program doing this, and some people, there are so many good stories that so far haven't added up to a good total. We haven't figured out how to scale this stuff, and I am worried that the change is happening so fast that disruptive innovation rarely comes from within. We've had this discussion before, that disruptive innovation tends to be foisted upon you when you're trying really hard to keep the sandcastle from being washed away. Are we making enough progress to make the change fast enough, some of us, or is there going to be a disruptive innovation that causes all of a sudden for us to have a great deal of pain in higher education as we transition? I know, but you call me and ask crazy questions too, so it's okay. North Carolinians can do this. I didn't talk about football or anything else, so I can do this, right?
Before I went to work for the university system, I worked on a project that was working with rural communities in the South, and the question was, what are we going to do after the big manufacturing plant leaves? And that was the profile of most of the places we worked. The places that were most successful, honestly, were those that were most deeply broken, that had been really fundamentally shaken to their roots. Those that lost a manufacturing plant, but they had 2 others. They really weren't that much interested in change. They took the grant money that we offered them, but in terms of fundamentally re-examining what they do and how they do it, that really didn't happen. It happened in 3 places that, if you'd asked me at the beginning, were the most broken, and it's because they were the most ready for change. And I think I can speak better for the 4-year university side than for the 2-year side, but I honestly think the change is going to come after significantly more pain has been suffered. I don't think we've suffered enough yet to work quickly enough to proactively solve the challenges that we have.
And then,
And real quickly, onto that point, I think what inhibits the ability to change is the regulatory environment in which we all live. We may want to respond, but accreditation doesn't allow us to respond. I have an institution in our system, I was telling the story earlier during the break, that's trying to launch a new degree program, and start to finish, from the time their faculty conceived of the degree to respond to the market needs, it's going to take 3 years before it gets through all the on-campus approvals, the external reviews, the notification of the accrediting agencies, the state agency approvals. That's not a responsive market. Business can't do that. So when folks try to take the disruptive theory that applies so much to business and try to apply it to education, there's, to me, a couple pieces that are really, really missing. One is, this is not an open market. You can't just come in and start an education business. You got enough capital and you got an idea and you can start a business. This is a highly, highly regulated business, and accreditation places all kinds of constraints on it. And the people that sit on those accrediting boards are very, very traditional, what people tied to the old way of doing things, and sometimes they're not at all interested in innovation. The people coming to review your program may not be at all interested in what you're doing. They may have no concept of what it is you're trying to do. They may be from a school that doesn't even look like your school. They're from a little tiny liberal arts school, and you're a community college on the cutting edge of innovation and technology. That's why this disruption, we have not felt nearly enough pain, because there's a whole lot of other things that have to change besides us. It's the regulatory environment, the accreditation environment that's going to have to change as well. We can respond faster, much, much faster, if given the ecosystem in order to do so.
there are a lot of fields. Yeah, go ahead.
I understand all that, and I would say that if we really agreed on what the changes were, that we could form a coalition of campuses that would come to accrediting agencies and work on that. On a one-off basis, I think it's like unilateral disarmament and economic development. Yes, we'll stop incentives. Great. Well, one state stops incentives. Every other state gets all the projects. I think the same thing is true for fundamental change in academia. I think if a single university tries to go to their accrediting agency and say, I know the criteria that work for everybody else, or you've thought about them a lot, but they're wrong for us. Please consider us as an exception. That's not really going to work. But I think if we really did see what's coming and how it's coming, that we would be more likely to form coalitions and do something about it. I think the problem is we don't see enough.
Jay and then Beth.
Let me just mention something along those lines. I mentioned earlier that I was also asked to be chair of our developing state longitudinal data system.
I didn't know how. I didn't want to talk about that because it confused me. But that's
it's a horrible way to spend your summer. I'll tell you that. It's but we have 9 of the largest state agencies are involved. I'm the lone private sector guy in that group, and it was primarily centered around educational operations, K through 12. Community college and universities, but we've also added everything from Medicaid to human resources and so forth. And I think one of the interesting things about that is one of these transformative issues. It's not a new device. It's not like television. They say it took so many years to come online. It's the sheer accumulation of data. And that is going to drive every market that there is. It's going to drive the manufacturing area. It's going to drive education. We have so much information, and it is being mined all the time, that if you don't try to at least get out in front of it, it is going to dictate where you're going to be, because everybody is trying to accumulate data in every way that they can and use it to drive where they're going to go. So devices are useful in terms of trying to manage some of that. But beyond that, that's the area I think it's going to go to.
Beth, go ahead.
We've invested heavily in Kentucky in industry partnerships, employer-led industry partnerships, where employers identify their needs and they articulate them to the education continuum. And we actually had a discussion where the advanced manufacturing providers in a particular region identified 16 career pathways and identified their talent pipeline needs all along from K to graduate level work that needed to be done. And the pushback from the education community was, until our faculty sign off on it, we aren't going to do anything to move towards these career pathways. And that in and of itself is a no-go for your employer community. I mean, that just is a dead stop. And the other thing on the data issue, we really have to be willing to take a look at the good, the bad, and the ugly. And the whole issue of teacher preparation is a great example. We have a longitudinal data. Our higher education institutions didn't want to show the results of their teacher preparation work because we were tracking them from the school that they went to the school district or the community college or the university they were working with, and the success rates that they got. And they wanted to not publish the report because it would embarrass the institution. And I think we have to use that data to bring about the change. And we can't be afraid of sharing the good, the bad, and the ugly.
Leslie and Michael just got right up to the edge of everything that Governor Beebe was discussing when we put this weekend agenda together. And a lot of the idea was that on a global scale, Palo Alto and Cambridge are considered to be where innovation resides. There is not a single southern state as far ahead of some of the rest of us as North Carolina has been and as Georgia has been, and everybody else has some little piece of specialty that they can claim as their own. There's not one state with enough resource to go to bat against those two in terms of reputation out in the world. And one of the things that we really hope to drive conversation on this weekend, and it gets back to Leslie's point about what if a group of universities showed up and said, here's how we want to do things. As hard as we compete, and coming out of the economic development world, I can tell you it's cutthroat. As hard as we compete, there've got to be some places where, as southern states, we say, we do this well, you do this well. Our job is not to try and imitate what you do. Our job is to try and figure out places where we can collaborate, because together we can be, in lots of areas, just as strong as our competitors on the coast. And as manufacturing, particularly, continues to move south, what we never want to end up with is, the attitude that we make it here in Mississippi and Arkansas and Alabama and Georgia and South Carolina and North Carolina and everybody else, but the folks who decide how it's going to get made and what it's going to look like and what the market for it is all live either in San Francisco or New York City. We got to have those jobs come with the middle skills jobs. And that's going to involve collaboration between all of us, particularly, and sitting on stage with people with whom we are collaborating on, these NSF opportunities out there where no one school can get it done. And it takes, the University of Arkansas and Texas Tech and the University of Tennessee all being willing to lay down their Saturday afternoon sword and shield and say, we got to be a team.
Walter.
Yeah, Ted, I want to make a comment before we stop this afternoon, and I'm fascinated by many of the things we've heard today, but one of the things I haven't heard much about is the international and global impact of what we're doing and the interest in our respective colleges, systems, workforce systems, and so forth. There's probably not a month that goes by that I don't have another country in my office wanting to know how they can either start a community college, expand a community college, create opportunities for some folks in their countries to get an education. I've had 3 calls in the last 2 weeks, 2 from the White House, 1 from the State Department, about what were we doing in China, what were we doing in India, and what were we doing in Africa. And I just think that we've got to continue to think globally about how we do some of these connections and how that impacts. Certainly, I'm from the South, I'm from Kentucky, and I understand that, worked in Texas, worked in Louisiana, but I think what we're dealing with now, and I think our governors are well aware of that, is that it's a bigger stage now, and there's more at stake.
And today you're working in Arkansas, so it's good. You know,
Back in Arkansas.
Everybody always, you know, we hear the pushback all the time that we can't do this because. And so we do that with groups, and we do a lot of trend spotting. Some of you have heard me do some of this about the future. And one of the things we show is how fast disruption can destroy what used to be sacred. And you can do that in the publishing business, the newspaper business, the book business, the music business. You can keep going of places that have lines that look like this and then go, and not because they evolved, but because they radically were shifted. And you know, Jay, you talked about businesses creating certification programs. If business ever decides that all they need is someone with that certification program, they don't need a 2-year college, they'll find a way to teach that, get that taught. If somebody overseas has online courses that somebody here recognizes as decent and it's lower price, that'll happen. So we're gonna see those things. I agree with Leslie that there's probably more change. You said pain, I'll just say change in the future as we go. But I wanna open it up for you guys to ask questions. But I want to first just congratulate them. Nobody here knew anything that was going to be asked. I like it that way more because, so we didn't let them prep. We just got that degree of smart answers. And what was clear to me is everybody's been thinking about this stuff. You know, we all, every day, we have to go through our life and we run our 60-hour weeks and then, but people are, it's there. It's right on the edge in front of us and we're thinking about it. So they deserve a lot of credit for being so thoughtful and being so smart about this stuff. And if we could just get them all in charge of everything, then we'd be in pretty good shape. So let's thank them first. And now let's torture them with hard questions. Because hey, they deserve it, right? You know, they had that cookie. So questions from the audience. Who would like to ask someone up here a question? Or make a comment about what they've heard? And y'all can't be shy. Yeah. Mike, no, it's coming to you. You know how this works.
Grant, part of what you were talking about really resonated in terms of trying to take a regional approach to dealing with some of the things more in the R&D world. Yeah. So I think there's so much to be learned in this case from higher education and that real high end of it, the doctorate granting institutions, because if you look at how academic scientists are collaborating, the problems in science and medicine are so tremendous that they've got to find ways of working together. They could care less about who won or lost last weekend's football game. They're going to find the smart people that they need to work with wherever they are, and they're going to figure out how to interact. Now, how do we get you and our other esteemed commissioners and directors of economic development across the region to sit down and talk about cooperating? Because as you say, it is a cutthroat business, but how do you get past that?
Let me give you the example that's sitting so obviously right in front of Arkansas, Tennessee, and Mississippi right now. Memphis. There is no reason on planet Earth that the state of Tennessee, the state of Arkansas, and the state of Mississippi should be replicating each other's workforce training programs. Waste of money, waste of time, dumb. Because it's an MSA. I mean, you know, if the river weren't there, you couldn't tell the difference between Memphis and East Arkansas. And you sure can't tell the difference between where the Toyota plant is in North Mississippi and Memphis. And again, you couldn't tell the difference geographically, you know, scenery-wise, who the people are between what's going on there and what's going on in South Arkansas. And so every dime, and everybody's hungry for the money. And so, you know, the two-year folks in Arkansas are up in the Capitol saying, give us more money, give us more money, give us more money. And the ones in Tennessee are doing the same, and the ones in Mississippi are doing the same. And we're all doing the exact same thing within 50 miles of one another. Dumb. And we've got to stop. And in fact, you know, we're having a dinner tonight among a number of these people to start trying to talk about, to your point about unilateral disarmament, it can't be unilateral because we're all so scared of one another. But we've got to get focused on, you know, okay, draw a circle. Who are the industries there? Which ones of you are going to serve which ones of these, and how can we create programs that are complementary to one another, and how can we open up opportunity for people inside that catchment area? You know, let the money follow the kid. And I don't care whether that kid is doing 3 months in a training program at an ad tech school in East Arkansas and then going across the river to Memphis for, you know, another 6 weeks course, and then ultimately going to work in Mississippi, because it's one MSA. And if we don't start looking at the world that way, because I promise, and 2 weeks ago, I was in 3 different European countries. In September, I'm going to China and Taiwan. Those folks could not, if you handed them a map of the United States without the states drawn in, they don't know, and they don't care. They just want to know that they can get the people. And so we've got to start looking at the world, at our worlds, the way the rest of the globe looks at us.
It's a great tee-up. Southern Governors Association has been working over the last year, and will be working for the next 2 years on trying to build some connectivity on the advanced manufacturing sector across the South. What is it that we can collectively do? What can we collectively know? And that's was our first piece. How can we build collective information that we all can build from? How can we build, Jay, and we've talked about this, how can we get all of our manufacturing groups across the South to start finding common areas that they want to work on, whether that's legislative or whether it's investment in infrastructure or whether it's, you know, national changes. If education wants to come in and say, we need to look at this, but how do we collectively act? And I'll go ahead and tell you that it's really hard to get people to want to collectively do things. We're busy. We're competing. You know, it's hard, but we do have that ability. So when you get a call or a letter that says we need your help to do that, and you believe in it, say yes. Yeah.
I've got 4 things. I think Grant's running this weekend, so we've got
It's running me.
4 things that I think you should come out with an agreement on. First is an agreement to share training programs across state borders. Second is to get in-state tuition offered in public universities along borders within people who are living within 30 miles of a border. Third is to get to share revenue on property taxes that come from economic development projects. And fourth is branding the southern United States as a whole when you're going into international markets, and then fighting about who gets the specific project later. So if you could just do that this weekend, you got 4 days.
I think
so.
lock us in a room with Nerf bats and we'll get it taken care of.
Who wants to go to China and brand themselves as the American South with Grant? We've done this before.
Yeah.
We've been to China as, how many do we have? 9 of the secretaries in office? 8 or 9 of them. We've done this, and it sells. And you're absolutely right. Because I've done it as an economic developer in North Carolina, and you end up saying, well, we're somewhere between Florida and Washington, D.C. and then you get tobacco, and you say, yeah. And they say, Michael Jordan, you say, yeah. And they go, is there a city there? And you say, well, yeah, there's a few. And that's the American South.
And here it's Bill Clinton and Walmart.
Right, yes, Walmart, yes. You know, American South, yeah.
Ted, I've been taken by one thing. I've been thinking about the comment that was made earlier from the gentleman from Apple about iPod.
Yep.
And how that was a disruption of monumental proportions.
Yes, we didn't have to move our records anymore.
But that happened within a company.
Yep.
And then I'll take that. And then what Grant said about Leslie and Michael's comments, that we'd come to the edge of what the weekend was about, and that was maybe how we come together. I don't want to try to say. So I want to maybe pose a question to Michael and Leslie, or ask you all to take it. So take it to the next point. So then how does that happen? How do we get past accreditation, faculty power, and those issues within the academy, the other regulatory environment issues that we have? How do we come together to influence? So take it to the next point, and how do we handle that? Where do we go?
Michael, you go ahead and answer that. Leslie's already still burning from the last list, so.
Those are hard questions. Faculty first. We have to, as academic leaders on campus, I think, have much more candid conversations with faculty about how the world is changing. Full disclosure, I'm a faculty member. I'm a PhD in political science. I came up through the ranks. I sat on faculty governance bodies. Spent 10 years on the faculty before I joined administration. I fully appreciate the role of faculty, and up until last year, I still continue to teach, even as an administrator. And I miss the classroom. That said, faculty in many places lead a very insulated life, and it's for good reasons, because it provides a very safe environment to engage in the basic research that we need to come out of some institutions. But it's remarkable how many of them are not aware of the realities of the declining state budgets and the requirements of regulation and all the reports that get filed. What happens instead is they see a report that shows the number of administrators that have been hired at a university, and oh, it's administrators feeding themselves and it's administrative bloat. The number of deans on campuses don't change. The number of chancellors don't change. The administrators that by and large have gotten hired on campuses are to satisfy requirements from regulatory bodies, state and accrediting bodies, and to meet demands like state reporting requirements and increased focus on student success and things like that. We have to get them more comfortable with the fact that there's real risk that some of our institutions may not be in business in the future if we don't make some fundamental changes in the way we do business. So that's one thing I think has to happen is they need to read more than just the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed to see what's going on. And those are important venues. And perhaps folks outside of higher education need to read more of the Chronicle and Inside Higher Ed. It's just a two-way street. On the accreditation side, that one's a real tricky one because it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you get really kind of in the bowels of the accreditation movement, it's almost one of these kind of things where they point the finger at each other. They position themselves between the institution and the Department of Higher Ed, and they sort of say, you're lucky we're here to protect you from the department, because if it weren't for us, things would be a whole lot worse than it really is. And people go, my gosh, how could it be much more worse than it really is? And I'm not really sure it would be that much worse. I think the regulation would be very different. I think it would be, are you fiscally sound? Do you have independent governing boards? I think a lot of the learning outcome stuff and a lot of the, I do this all the time, and I'm going to get burned someday and really stop doing it. But I'd ask my colleagues in the room, how many of you really feel that after an accreditation visit, your institution was improved relative to the ROI of the effort you put into the accreditation? How many of you really felt your institution improved dramatically as a result of all the time and effort you did to complete your self-study, host the host team, and deal with all the regulatory plans? So show of hands on that.
Go ahead, let's see some honesty in the room.
Not a single hand is up. Not a single hand is up. This process is broken. There is so much done to check boxes and require and deal with all this. And it's a silly thing. Let me give you another real silly example of where we just, I wish some legislative group would step in, policymakers. I don't think the state can't do it by itself, but maybe a coalition can. We have national accrediting bodies, right? But the gold standard in accreditation are the regional accrediting bodies. And if you are at say a Bible college, for example, and accredited by the National Bible College accrediting body that does that, and you take freshman English and transfer to one of the state institutions, there's a very good probability that freshman English class will not transfer because it wasn't taken at a regional accrediting body. So here's what's going to happen. That student's going to come into the regional institution, the state institution, and they're going to have to take it again. And you as taxpayers, all of us as taxpayers, pay for that class now twice, because we paid for it once when they got accreditation from their national organization. It wasn't accepted, so they're going to take it again, and we're going to pay for it again because the student's going to have to take it again to get it accepted at the regional institution. To borrow Grant's phrase, that's stupid, right? It's freshman English. Is it that different? And even if mathematics is taught with 7 loaves and 7 fishes as the examples, it's still college math. I mean, accept it. If it's been accredited, approved by an accrediting body, and you line up the standards, they all talk about the same stuff, accept it. So there's some simple reforms I think we can do to move along that way, but it's going to take some, and we're all scared of it, right? We're scared of that conversation because if we start raising those issues, we get sanctioned, and we're not about quality anymore. And so it's a really, really hard conversation. I didn't answer your question. I'm sorry. It's hard.
I want to wrap myself out first before I say what I'm going to say. For those of you from Arkansas, I'm a liberal Democrat, and everybody knows it. But I will say, by show of hands, how many people believe that if we got rid of every cosmetology board in the South, that somebody would die getting a haircut in the next year? Nobody believes it. The accreditation boards exist for the same reason that the cosmetology board exists. And that's not anymore to protect the students, it's to keep other people from getting into the higher education business. That's why the cosmetology board exists, period, end of story. That's why it exists. Nobody's dying from a haircut. And I think that the answer to your question gets back to what Leslie said a little while ago, which is it's going to change when the level of pain gets so great that the business community and everybody else says, no more, no more, no more.
I would add just one other thing. I think there's the point of spear thing. The spear is pointed at your body and you're about to change. So it's when you've lost 5 economic development projects and the 6th one tells you they're going down the road unless you figure out a way to work with the county next door. So that's one point of spear. In universities, we had it recently happen with German programs. It looked like 3 or 4 German programs didn't have enough enrollment. So unless they worked together, then they were not going to have German programs on their campuses anymore. So that's point of spear near death. The other one is essentially the bribery. There is a huge economic development project. Let's just say hypothetically it involves Mississippi and it's an auto plant. And they seem to want to locate on a border. We're going to figure out how to do that. And Jay figured out how to do that. And so I think either of those could be a motivation. And those are the things you can use as evidence once they happen. They happen, I don't think it happens because Southern governors decide suddenly that they want to brand themselves as the American South. It's because they're sucking air. Every state is suffering, and they realize with some economies of scale that if they take 7 different trips every year to China, or 14 or 21 or whatever it is, that they're going to be wasting a lot more money than if they took a smaller number of trips and branded themselves with somebody else. So I think those are the opportunities that we can build off of.
Jerry, jump in.
Yeah, I think most of the progressive people are in this room right here, but once you leave this room, you go back into institutions or systems where don't have all the wisdom you have here. So I'm involved in university research and collaboration, multi-campus. It's all in the vocabulary, but we have been unable to get a multi-campus collaborative agreement on intellectual property. Okay, we don't have it. We tried it. It got stuck in the legal systems of 2 of our systems, and good people have come away extraordinarily frustrated, and they say, I've got to pick my battles. This is not a battle I want to pick, but it's my life. It's his life. And so NSF, NIH, multi-campus, okay, we have an innovation that's going to be shared by multiple campuses. Somebody said all of these science guys are agnostic. They want to work on multiple campuses. Well, the administration understands how is that royalty going to be divided. We don't have a clue. So the reality is, our best interest is multi-campus collaboration and all this kind of stuff. Lawyers or people that haven't had the opportunity to be in this room with us this afternoon are saying, I'm protecting the mascot. Okay, so the devil's in the details.
Absolutely true. We do have a couple lawyers in the room, and they all front and just,
Ted,
like
I'd
this.
just say to tease Sunday, that's one of the issues that the head of the Board of Science and Technology in North Carolina is working on, is exactly that issue. So it's oh, good, you're on that panel. Okay.
And I get to moderate it, so I'll call on you for the question. I promise. Go ahead.
I would like to know your thoughts, and nobody's mentioned this today, and I found it's kind of interesting, on the future of higher education from the perspective of performance funding, VFA, and the president's ranking system.
All right, well, we were doing so well. Okay, go ahead.
Let me take one of them.
Okay, pick your favorite.
I'll do performance-based funding. Nice idea. I'm not a big fan of sticks. I like carrots a little better. Big fan of the book Nudge and some other ways. But I think states have undercut the ability of performance-based funding to make a difference. When you start cutting the funding that comes from the states, it's not a big threat anymore. Right, so I've only been in the state here for about a year and a half. In Texas, our state, in my last institution, 55% of the budget at one time was from the state. It was now down to 18%. And the performance-based piece of that was now 5%. So the threat was 5% of 18%. It's not going to drive policy. It's not going to drive decisions on campus. It'd be nice to keep that much. But if the states continue to cut the funding for the institutions, the teeth in performance-based funding starts to go away because it's now not that significant portion of your budget.
When do we start seeing state universities not be state universities? When do we see when do we see the first time where a university says, "Tell you what we're going to do"?
That's been tried. Virginia, for example, asked for it and it was refused to. I mean, the joke is state-supported, state-located, state-assisted, now it's state-located.
But when are we going to see the first one where the legislature and the university cut a deal? You leave me alone, I'll do my thing.
You're seeing some of that. You're seeing some requests to say, look, we'll give up the remaining 5% of our budget or 8% of our budget, but here's the deal. We cut out all the reports that we have to send in and all the other stuff.
And we appoint our own board and we do whatever.
I think it's an interesting conversation.
States also go back to, and Arizona, Michigan also have dealt with this. When I was at the University of Texas at Austin, we made some of those same arguments. But when you start to look at health care funding and the retirement funding that comes from the state, you can't just argue the state funds.
No, it's a math issue. I'm just saying, someday the math gets there. Though.
If I could respond to your question about rankings, though, I think the most difficult piece about that, and this is one of the areas where all of what we call the Big Six in Washington, and that's the 6 largest higher education organizations that represent all of our universities and colleges, have come together in unanimous agreement. It's too difficult to try to think about rating and ranking institutions. If you say we're going to have a rating system without a ranking system, it's a distinction without a difference, really. And so it's just so difficult to put together. How would you rank the University of Arkansas at Fayetteville vis-a-vis Pulaski Tech, vis-a-vis East Arkansas Community College, or just the universities? It's a really difficult conversation. I think we all agree that that's an initiative that maybe perhaps has, well, Arnie Duncan is still supportive of it. I have to say that, the secretary, but I don't know that there's a lot of support for that nationally. The VFA, the Voluntary Framework of Accountability, I think has been a great system of measurement, but as I said earlier, haven't met a president yet that doesn't want to be accountable, but just by what metrics are we looking at? And that's university and community colleges.
More questions from you guys? I'm going to ask them to ask y'all questions if y'all don't ask, so just fair warning.
Yeah, a quick one. I want to follow up, Leslie, on something you said. You mentioned the 4 components that you heard from businesses: adaptability, communication skills, learning agility, and multicultural awareness, I think.
Yep.
So the 2-part question. One, we've got a lot of different people represented up on the panel, from community colleges to system-wide offices and individual universities, and a project here and so forth. Does it apply to all of you? Would you agree with those 4? And the second part of the question is, if you agree with those 4, that businesses are saying this is what I need, how are you institutionally making sure in your academic programs that those 4 things are happening actually? If that's what business desires, how's it happening? I heard fringe things, but not something that's institutionalized.
Who wants to jump in on, are you infusing that into curriculum?
I want to say that, and I said it earlier, that I agree with Leslie's premise that, and the way we characterize it is, employers are looking for people who can learn a bunch of new skills over and over and over again and adapt. In Arkansas, and there are going to be some people in the room that aren't going to be too happy to hear me say this, and I'm betting that it's the same in a lot of southern states. In addition to that, what I'm hearing from manufacturers is, I need people who can read a ruler. We don't have that first. And so, again, we're back to yes, please, and yes, please. I mean, we've got to get the blocking and tackling right and start pushing for more. And I will say, again, doesn't make me popular, but in Arkansas, our biggest difficulty, and this applies to the general population, it applies to the education community, it applies across the board, is we need more ambition. I mean, we just need people who want both to learn how to read a ruler and take the next step to become adaptable. And one of the things we know, and Jay talked about it, the phrase we use here, which we attribute to Dr. Elder, and I don't know that I've ever seen the quote, but you can't be what you can't see. We have a large swath of our population that has no role model for being the guy who can read the ruler, much less being the guy who is intellectually curious enough that he's going to learn 2 or 3 things over the course of his life. And so, we've got a lot of heavy lifting to do here. And one of the things that a bunch of us who've been working on it for a long time have slowly come to the realization of is we can mess and tweak the system every day for the next 100 years. It comes back to what we talked about at the beginning. It's that communication with the kid and their parents at the right time to say, this is what it's gonna take. And, you're better off taking that 3rd math in high school, even if you get a C in it, than you are shirking the 3rd math to, keep the GPA you need to be able to get into college. I mean, we need generally more ambition out of our population here in Arkansas for academic success and the acquisition of knowledge.
Jump in.
In terms of what we're doing, my first failure when I came to the university system, let me make that clear, was trying to lead a statewide effort to rebrand North Carolina as the entrepreneurial state. This crashed and burned with an explosive force that was hard to imagine when I first undertook it. But out of that came 11 different, out of our 16 four-year campuses, 11 different entrepreneurship centers that came together and said, look, we didn't get this grant, but we've spent so much time thinking about this, we want to do it anyway. And those things vary in effectiveness and size and scope in terms of what their ambition is. But what they've done is at least start a dialogue on campus about what we're doing to get our students ready for a future that requires adaptability and learning agility and creativity. The other thing we're working on right now is a fundamental revamp of what we call Gen Ed, or general education. Basically, sort of what happens in the first couple of years generally to get people in the ballpark of having critical thinking skills. And so we're trying to fundamentally reimagine that. And one of the big emphases there is effective communication and this notion of learning to work on teams, whether they're multicultural or single cultural teams. So I think there are some things that you can begin to do to talk about those things. We've also begun talking about very intentional internship programs, which for a lot of technical colleges are going to be redundant because that's how they've done everything for a while. But it's a little countercultural sometimes for universities to intentionally build in applied learning to degree programs.
You want to talk a little bit about Maryland and?
So, I mean, we haven't done anything quite what North Carolina did, although our chambers of commerce have gotten together and are actually doing that sort of listening tour right now. But, you know, I would say if we had probably STEM, you know, almost all businesses say universities and community colleges, you need to produce more STEM workers, even if the data is a bit unclear. I mean, there's been a little bit of pushback on the requirements on STEM. And in our area, you know, cybersecurity is a big area where I think, and we're somewhat unique there, that we do have more specific needs of industry. And so STEM is one thing that we've been focusing on quite a bit.
Jump in.
I agree with the list. I mean, sometimes you see it crafted a little differently, problem-solving skills, teamwork, those sorts of things get put on there. One thing that we're doing with the effort that I mentioned that I'm sort of leading for our system is asking faculty as they build these new courses for us to identify from a set of skills that employers have identified which ones are going to be in that particular class, and then transcript that in addition to the letter grade in the particular course, so that over the course of a student's curriculum, we'll also be able to note they had 5 classes that had problem-solving skills in, or 6 of them that involved multicultural awareness, or had 3 of them where they had to give an oral presentation. So that the employer probably doesn't care as much about really what happened in history prior to 1865. They're probably more interested in those skills that they're going to get that they can translate to the workforce.
Time for one more in the audience. Here we go. Yeah, you can have the last one. I'll tell you, I'll let one other person go. You go ahead. Don't want you to feel bad about it. Make it a hard one.
Well, this is kind of a combination. One thing that, the question that came up about the faculty, one thing that has helped to drive change at our institution has been some Department of Labor grants and ARA grants. And while you know, you think that some folks should be able to do, faculty should be able to drive it themselves, but when you have a timeline and you have funds to help support it, and you have stipends and training, and you have a cause to bring people together to think about how they can accomplish these set goals, it makes change happen. The state, 22 community colleges came together to work on the PACE grant is what we call it, and it's about to close out next year, but each college was able to choose their own curriculum area, and we chose business and CIT, computer information technology. Those areas needed to be changed. They listened to industry, they listened to what their needs were, and they revamped tremendously, but they would not have done it just on their own. It caused them to make the change. Grant's aware, but we have a group, Southwest Arkansas, that's working on a Department of Labor grant that's for industry in this case, and pulling together employers and engaging employers as well as faculty and others to make the changes. And it's driving the change that would not, we had programs, we were meeting industry needs to some extent, but it caused our faculty to look at the curriculum to make changes and improvements, and if you weren't engaged with employers, to get more engaged with it. And I can see from just discussions, we are moving the needle, but it's not real fast, but we are making changes. But I think with some of that, I didn't hear anything mentioned before, but kind of intimated a little bit about giving credit for prior learning. And we are moving more in that direction. We've done some, but I didn't know if anybody wanted to address anything along prior learning, because there's a lot of learning that goes on that's not necessarily in the classroom, but it is at the employer's location that we can give credit for and drive people in that degree pursuit that can lead to upper level jobs.
So I promised that we'd be out at 5, and it's 7 of. So I'd like to just give you any opportunity to say anything lastly that you would like to do. I would like you to think about that the Southern Governors Association is a platform for trying to come together and think about some of these things, to find collaborations that work for us. What can we do collectively? We're going to disagree on a bunch of things, just the nature of the world. But we think we can find common grounds that are in everybody's interest. When we teach collaborative models, we say collaboration occurs when it's in your interest to collaborate. And so if you could find some way of doing that. So I do think, by the way, I wasn't just pandering before. I think y'all have been exceptional in your comments today. Anything you'd like to finish with? Start at the top here. I'm sorry, you don't want to start with?
No.
I've only picked it her once. I can't do it again.
Oh, it's me. Okay.
Yeah, it's you.
All right.
I'm sorry. Go for it.
No, the one thing that I would say is that collaboration, I think, begins at the beginning. There's a point in education when kids are in preschool, kids are in kindergarten, that desks are in a circle, we work in groups, and at some point along the way, we just stop doing it. We stop cooperating. I'd like to see schools get back to the idea of clubs on the level of academic clubs.
Good idea.
We have sports, and I support sports, but there are a lot of kids today who are interested in the programming and the coding that our industry folks want to see. And I think opportunities to create these organizations within the school bodies also helps them down that pathway to higher education, where they see what they want to do further down the road.
So I'm on the issue of manufacturing. I'm on the Fraunhofer USA board, and the Fraunhofer Institutes is a way of applied research from Germany that does a lot of things in manufacturing and higher education. And that model has been described by the Obama administration as something that they would like in the U.S. And there are a number of Fraunhofer Institutes in the U.S., including one at Maryland, but there's not any more in the South. So I would just offer I'd be glad to talk to you all about that as you build your model for advanced manufacturing. Secondly, on the Arkansas IP issue, no project should fail because people can't agree on IP. And I think there's some models out there. I'll be glad to talk to you, because people get, thinking they're going to get the big hit in IP, and they're not. And too many of these collaborations fail because of that, and it's wrong. And having the lawyers in charge, throw them out of the room. And then the last one, unpaid internships. I mean, that's something that I think, there's legal issues about that. And I know I got my career volunteering for a congresswoman and got no pay. And I think that kind of opportunity, because of our legal issues and other things, is another area where making sure we can engage with industry and higher ed on a pretty seamless way is one other area I think maybe needing reform.
Great. Jay?
There's been a lot of discussion about how dysfunctional Congress is, but they did manage to pass a bill here recently, the new Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. And we're still going through that, as I'm sure many of you are as well. But there's a couple of issue areas that we've talked about here today, and one that I noticed, and I'll leave it with you, is the whole area of performance metrics. We passed a bill in the legislature this last year that requires our community colleges on an individual basis to develop new performance metrics that will show whether they are being effective in terms of their workforce development programs. And they had some metrics before. It was, did you graduate somebody from the program? How long were they employed? And did it have an impact on their income? But these are now going to be more outcome-oriented, I guess you'd say, in a different way, in terms of going out to the private sector businesses and seeing whether the level of training is resonating with them. Is it really what they need? And if not, then they're supposed to go back and make those adjustments. That is reflected in the national bill, and I think that's going to be an important area that we all look at, because there's going to be more and more demand in that area on the federal level and certainly on the state levels as well.
Leslie?
1 Minute Fish story focuses on future and who I think our customers are, which are our students. I was in a program 6 years ago in which I was with a bunch of other international people, and this guy came in one morning from Britain, and he was outraged about this question. He said, you know this whole idea of give a man a fish and he eats for a day, but teach a man to fish and he eats for the rest of his life? I said, yeah, I think I used that in a speech yesterday. He said, No. Well, it's absolute rubbish, isn't it? And I couldn't figure out what he was talking about. I said, what do you mean? That's what we do, is we teach people. He said, no, it's absolute rubbish. What happens if one day he decides he doesn't want to fish anymore? What happens if one day the fish stop biting? What happens if one day people stop buying fish? Well, he's out of luck, isn't he? What we need to be doing is getting people ready for a world without fish.
You going to end on that? You're done? Okay. I'm sorry, Beth. Beth is a good friend. I hate to make her follow that. You going to do accents?
A couple of thoughts.
Okay.
First is that we really have to focus on the talent development pipeline, and that means sectors, pathways, and partnership, and build in that career awareness, exploration, and preparation. And that we really do have to focus on the individual confidence level of those folks we are trying to engage or re-engage into our system.
Good point.
Because if we don't, we just will be doomed to failure. When folks have failed in the system somewhere along, their confidence level in being able to re-engage and be successful is a huge issue. And we have to stop and listen and think about strategies, whether it's cohorts, competency-based education, earn and learn environments, and other things, because if people don't come, we don't have an opportunity. And if they can't be successful in that, and the employer community can't afford to be on individual advisory boards at the K-12 level and the community college level and the higher ed level and have that by institution, they have got to be able to have a quality impact in an environment that they can lead the discussion and give what needs to be transformed, education, economic development, workforce development, and let that be the driver.
Smart. Yeah.
I was going to say what she's going to say, but I'm now going to do it in,
You are gonna say what
in a
Leslie
British
said, then?
accent so that you won't. I think I'd like to go back to the predominant comment in the first session, and where we expressed overwhelming concern about the decline in resources, and recognize that that's not going to change. Right? That money's not coming back. So if we go in to the legislators, policymaker, and say we can fix these problems if you just give us more money, that's not the environment in which we're going to continue to exist. So we're going to have to find ways to be leaner and more effective at the same time, and it's by concentrating on things like grit, which is this ability for people to have the tenacity to be successful. It's about doing things like prior learning assessment, where we can give appropriate credit for workforce experience training that's evaluated by faculty, that meets the academic standards of the institution. It's not just you spent 12 years in the accounting department, you now get credit for accounting. It has to be evaluated against some standards, because that reduces the cost of education for the student. It makes it quicker for them to get across the finish line. We need to embrace these innovative ideas that make us leaner and more effective so we can do our jobs, because we're not going to have as much money to do it with going forward. When we start to do those things, I think we will start to get more reception from policymakers about we're driving the cost out of education. You're embracing these innovative things that are responsive to the workforce needs, to students, helping them be successful. Most students that go to college, that drop out, a lot of it's not because they're not smart enough. It's because they got frustrated with the process or life got in the way. We've got to find ways to simplify that. We can keep a whole lot more of these people in college and get them across the finish line.
Walter?
Nothing to add at this point, just to say thank you for the invitation to be here. It's been a terrific honor being on this distinguished panel with such distinguished colleagues. Thank you very much.
Grant, you want to give us some host words too?
Sure. It's not going to, since we're all from the South, it's not going to surprise anybody to know that when Michael moved to Arkansas from Texas, he moved in across the street from me. And, you know, everybody knows everybody else in Arkansas. And I think we're probably sharing alpha waves at night from across the street, because when he started talking, I was like, well, he took my point. But you know, the fact that there was a lot of conversation at the beginning of the day about lack of resources is completely believable, since every state has cut the budgets for higher ed in the last few years. It's the fact that while everybody in here, and while the title of this afternoon was, what role does higher ed play in all of these things, everybody's sitting here just saying, well, you know, we're having to do all this with a whole bunch less money, and it's just kind of accepted. I mean, we haven't turned over any tables or set them on fire. And the truth is, you know, back to what I was saying before, there's not gonna be more money. There's not going to be more money tomorrow coming from the states into our own institutions. There's going to be less federal research dollars coming down the pike for all of the institutions to take advantage of. And one of the things we were really hoping to open up a conversation over the course of this meeting about is, okay, there's less money, which means every single one of us has got to be smarter about what we're doing with the money we have. And we need to begin to rely on one another to find ways to complement what we're doing to make the region stronger. Every single one of us in this room either works for or with a governor, and we've all heard them give the same speech at one time or another, which is, don't be jealous of your neighbor, because the rising tide lifts all boats. You know, so when we show up at the big announcement on one side of the state for a new steel mill, to rip one from the headlines, you know, and the next day he's across the state talking to somebody who just closed a plant, you know, his message is, look, what's happening over there is good for you. And, you know, we look at our surrounding states. We are one of the only southern states without an OEM auto manufacturer. And it chaps our ass. But the reality is, that is a technical term. The reality is that it's given us a real opportunity. You know, we're growing our parts manufacturers faster than a lot of the other states around us, because they're sitting here and going, well, look, I can be in Arkansas and I can sell parts into Tennessee, Mississippi, Texas, and Louisiana, and I don't have to compete with those OEMs for my workforce. So if I want to be in the parts business supplying all these guys, I'm going to put the factory in Arkansas. We really can, to Leslie's point, and have to start marketing ourselves together as a region. We're demanding it inside of every one of our states with our counties. I mean, we're saying if you're not taking a regional approach to your economic development, you're failing. Well, we got to start taking our own advice, and you know, there are still places where it is appropriate for us to compete. At the same time, there are a whole lot of places where, in the face of declining resources, if we don't start figuring out how to work together, we are always going to be behind the other regions, most particularly the Northeast and California. So that's what I hope we can focus on over the next few days.
Thank you. Thank all of you for coming today. We've been trying this out for the last couple of years of having a policy discussion and an open forum of doing this at right beginning of the Southern Governors Association, and I hope you enjoyed it today. How many people walk away more depressed? How many people walk away a little more optimistic that there's a lot of things that can be done? A few, okay. You know. The fact that there's no more money, it sounded like we all agreed, so that's okay. We do a lot of trend spotting in our organization, and we try to predict the future a little bit based on trends. And two of the things we predict is that there will be austere state, local, and federal government money for the next foreseeable. And we also say there'll be austere family money, household money for the foreseeable future, that's also really tight. And so I think that those are sort of math issues that come into play with what we're talking about. But there will be demand for higher education resources. There will be demand for the product that you have. it will be overwhelming. People will need more skills. They will need more skills to compete. And people will be looking for places with answers. And so when you take all of this stuff and you put it together, the big thing is the so what question. You get all this stuff and you gnarl it around a little bit, then so what? What do you do with it? And I think we painted pictures up here of that it's hard. Collaboration is hard, don't, get new lawyers. You don't have to get rid of all lawyers, just get new lawyers, It's hard stuff, but the only poster that sits in my office is a quote from Teddy Roosevelt, which is that you do what you can with what you have where you are every day. And when you stop doing that, then we lose. But as long as you listen to all these guys, everybody's doing stuff. And we're getting better and we're responding, and everybody in the world's having these same issues. We're all in rapid change, and as we deal with it, we have to be purposeful and we have to be intentional and we have to create a differentiated product in order to win. Because it is a competition, whether we like it or not. And so what we hope to do is what Grant said over the next few days, try to get the governors and the people around them today to focus on this. And what we want you to do tonight, you want me to do the commercial that we want you to go out and spend all your money in Arkansas, right? And as much as you can, don't get arrested. If you do, call Grant at home. And if you don't get him, let it ring. Michael will pick it up because he'll hear it next door. And tell the people around you the good ideas you've heard and where we go forward. So thank you all very much. Let's thank them one more time.
Thank you, Ted.